Fellowship Farm. Book 10, Naw Ruz. The Fitzgeralds prepare for the annual Naw Ruz Mahta River boat race, but there are some unexpected hitches. Skye-Maree and Olingah learn about loyalty and sacrifice as they work out how to respond to the challenges they face. Chapter 1, Rain. The Fitzgerald children woke in the early morning darkness to the sound of pouring rain. Liza lay on the top bunk for just a few minutes past the usual get-up time of 6 o'clock, listening to the steady beat of the downpour on the window and roof of the old farmhouse. She smiled to herself. She hoped there would be much rain over the next 12 days. Liza swung her legs over the edge of the bunk and slithered down to the edge of her 9-year-old sister's bed. Placing one foot on Skye's bed and one foot on their younger brother's bed nearby, she rocked from one to the other, saying, "Hey, Skye! Ollie, it's raining!" Ollie and Skye scrambled out of bed and the three of them joined their parents in the living room. Romy and Flip had already had prayers and a big breakfast because it was the time of the fast. Once the sun rose, they would not eat or drink again until sunset. "Mum!" exclaimed Ollie as he gave her a big morning hug. "It's raining!" "Wonderful!" smiled Romy. She too was hoping for a wet couple of weeks leading up to Naw Ruz. But the rain wasn't all good news. After morning prayers and breakfast, the children put on woolly jumpers, socks, raincoats and rain hats to attend to their morning chores. As they did the rounds of the pig pen, the shed where the working dogs were chained, the chicken coop, the pigeons and the puppies, they shone the torch on the grass to try to find a path through the puddles and streams that were already in some places rather deep. The light of the torch reflected off the raindrops as they fell thick and fast from the slowly lightening sky. The drops looked like hundreds of beads of silver rushing towards the earth. As the children reached the farmhouse, the sun was just rising and the wind was picking up. They shook the water off their raincoats, hats and boots and hung them in the boot room. They hurried into the house to get ready for school and for the bus, which would arrive in half an hour. By the time the bus arrived, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. While they waited outside the gate of their farm, Liza, Skye-Maree and Olingah gathered the brightly coloured autumn leaves that were falling in the strong breeze from the trees near the farmhouse. Golden yellow, deep orange, rich red, the leaves, shiny and wet, were beautiful. The air smelt of autumn too. The damp earth, the leaves, and even the chill in the air brought back happy memories of autumns past. The school bus, clean of dust for once, but now splattered with mud, came splashing up the road to the farm. Ms. Rowbottom, the driver, opened the door with a lever. The children started to climb aboard. "Good morning," they greeted her. "Don't you go bringing those leaves into my bus," replied Miss Rowbottom. "And take off your raincoats before you sit down on my seats," she added as the children abandoned their bunches of colour by the side of the road and then left their raincoats in the racks at the front of the bus. As the bus drove from Fellowship Farm to Kellyton Township, it collected children from other farms. Soon the bus was full of Kellyton Primary School students. The windows quickly misted over and Skye drew a picture of a puppy with her finger. 2 other children played noughts and crosses on the windows. But most of the children were talking about the event that was coming up the weekend after next. And soon, the windows were covered with dripping pictures of rafts of all shapes and sizes, drawn with fingers in the condensation. Chapter 2, Preparing the Bonfire. For the rest of the week, the sun and the rain took turns in the sky, and the wind rose and dropped, pulling the leaves from the trees and scattering them across the farm. But on Saturday morning, a bright sun shone on the green hills of the farm and the surrounding bushland. When prayers, breakfast, and chores were completed, the family put on their boots and gloves and headed up the slope to the shed where Flip parked the ute. The children clambered into the back and held tightly to the metal bar above the cab of the ute. In the back of the ute with the children was a large wooden box. It contained a chainsaw, axe, hand saw, several packets of earplugs, goggles, and a can of petrol. There was also an old rusty wheelbarrow turned upside down and a big blue tarpaulin, folded and held in place by a corner of the wooden box. These were the tools they would need for the big job ahead of them. As Romy drove the ute through the paddocks to the orchard and bushland that separated the farm from the sand dunes, the rushing air pulled the children's hair from their faces and put roses in each of their cheeks. When they reached an area of bush where there were lots of fallen trees and branches, Romy stopped the ute. Sticks crackled and there was a scurrying of lizards and other small animals as the children jumped down from the back of the ute. Flip took the goggles out of the wooden box and put them on his head. It reminded Ollie of his Uncle Jack at the aquatic centre, and he started to giggle. Inside the goggles, Flip crossed his eyes at Ollie. Then he handed out earplugs and everyone plugged their ears. The task for today was to make piles of firewood. Tomorrow's task would be to cart the piles down to the paddock next to the house. If it wasn't the time of the fast, they would have done both tasks today. But Romy and Flip needed to practice moderation. They would not be able to eat or drink until sunset, so they had to be careful not to sweat too much or wear themselves out. There was work for everyone. Olingah and Skye dragged the large sticks and the small branches into piles. Flip cut the fallen tree trunks and larger branches into smaller pieces using the chainsaw. Romy and Lisa made piles of wood that Flip cut, as well as adding logs that were already lying around. Sometimes, Romy or Lisa would use the axe or the handsaw to make a piece of wood more manageable. At first, it was very hard for Skye and Olingah to concentrate on their task. Every time they moved bits of wood, they would find slaters, long fat worms, hairy caterpillars, coloured beetles, ants, lizards and spiders of various colours and sizes, as well as their eggs and other interesting things. Every few minutes, Skye or Ollie would call out, "Hey, come and look at this!" Then the two of them would be occupied for several minutes, looking at, gently poking or carefully holding whatever it was they found. They never poked or held the spiders. After about 2 hours, however, there were several large piles of sticks and logs spread throughout the patch of bushland, ready for collection tomorrow. It was time for a break. Romy pulled out a basket from the front of the ute. It had water, crackers, cheese and fruit in it for the children. Each of the Fitzgeralds pulled out a piece of freshly cut log to use as a stool. Bits of sap stuck to the backs of their pants, but apart from that, the wood made perfect seats. The fresh air and hard work gave the children big appetites, and they were grateful for the delicious picnic. "I feel sorry for you," said Skye to her parents after a big drink. "It must be hard to sit and watch us eating and drinking and not be able to." "Sorry for us," exclaimed Flip and raised his eyebrows high on his forehead. "What could be more joyalicious than being out in the bush with my favourite family, obeying the law of fasting of Baha'u'llah, and preparing for the celebration of the festival of Naw Ruz, which we have with our friends from Kellyton." "Joyalicious?" asked Liza. "Joy-alicious," said Flip. "And how many of your schoolmates are going in the derby?" "Lots," grinned Ollie through a mouthful of cracker and cheese. For the past 3 years around Naw Ruz, the Fitzgeralds have organised the annual Naw Ruz Mahta River rafting race. Posters went up around town throughout the fast. The whole community was invited to make a raft or bring a rubber dinghy or a lilo and join the fun. The race started where the river ran through Fellowship Farm. It ended about 15 kilometres later at the bridge, where the river went under the road to the coast. After the rafting, everyone would come back to the farm for a big bonfire and celebrate Naw Ruz. That was why they were gathering wood. And that was why everyone was hoping for rain. If there was no rain, the river would be slow and shallow, and the raft race would not be as fun. As they ate their picnic, the wind picked up and clouds scuttled across the sky. Their sweaty backs and foreheads cooled quickly, and soon everyone agreed it was time to head home. Romy and Flip draped the tarpaulin over the largest pile of wood to protect it a little from the rain. Then everyone piled into the ute. It was too cold to go on the back of the ute now. No one wanted the wind on their face anymore. As they climbed into the ute, Liza let out a big sneeze that startled the galahs in the trees overhead. They flew off screeching loudly. Chapter 3. The Fair Square Share Rock. On Sunday morning, the Fitzgeralds loaded the utes with the big piles of sticks and logs gathered the day before. Flip and Romy drove the utes back and forth from the bushland to the bottom of the hill paddock. Everyone helped to heave the wood onto the backs of the utes and throw, push and drag it off at the other end. By late morning, the pile of wood for the bonfire was huge. The family leant against the utes looking at the pile, imagining the wonderful Naw Ruz bonfire with the Kellyton community next weekend. The autumn air was cool, but there were little wet patches on the backs of all their shirts. Their glowing faces were streaked with sweat and dirt. "Brothers and sisters," said Flip, raising both his hands in the air. "High fives all round!" Romy, Liza, Skye and Ollie slapped his hands with theirs. "Thank you for your service, Mummy," grinned Olingah, slipping his small hand into his mother's strong brown one. No, thank you, Olingah Gayatri William," replied Romy, squeezing his hand. "Now, who is going to help me make lunch? And who is going to help Daddy on the tractor?" There was one last job to be done to prepare for the bonfire. "Me!" cried Olingah and Skye-Maree at once. Liza was feeling tired and was already starting to walk back to the farmhouse. As she walked, she let out 3 big sneezes. "Oh," said Flip. "Everyone wants to help Mummy make lunch?" "No, I want to go with you." "No, I want to go on the tractor," Skye and Ollie shouted over the top of each other. Said Flip, rubbing his stubbly, grimy chin. "There's only room for 2 in the cabin of the tractor, the driver and 1 other. How can we make a fair decision about who comes with me?" "Skye could practice sacrifice," suggested Ollie. "Or you could sacrifice," replied Skye, glaring at her brother. "Yep, you're both right. One of you could practice sacrifice. But if no one wants to, how can we decide?" No one had any ideas. Finally, Ollie said, "We could use a fair square share rock." Skye agreed. Flip wandered over to the creek and found a small, smooth stone. When he came back, Ollie and Skye turned around to face the farmhouse away from Flip. When they turned back, Flip was squatting on the ground. He had both feet and both hands flat on the ground. "Left foot," said Skye. "Right hand," said Ollie. Flip raised his left foot and right hand for Skye and Ollie to peek under, but there was no stone. "Right foot," said Ollie. "Left hand," said Skye. Flip raised his right foot and left hand. "Yay!" squealed Skye as she saw the stone pressed into the earth where Flip's left hand had been. Ollie knew it was fair, but he was disappointed. He pushed his hands into the pockets of his jacket and pouted as he walked off towards the farmhouse. Romy followed him. "It looks like you're feeling disappointed, Ollie," said Romy gently. "Hm," said Ollie. He wanted to say, "It's not fair," but he knew it was fair, so he swallowed his words. Skye and Flip climbed into the white ute to head up to the big shed where the tractor was kept. "Can I steer?" said Skye. "You may," Flip nodded, and Skye climbed onto Flip's lap behind the wheel. Flip started the engine and changed the gear. Slowly, the ute started to move forward. Skye turned the steering wheel to the right, so the ute did a big half circle before crossing the creek and going through the open gate in the hill paddock fence. Skye turned the wheel left, and the ute headed up the driveway toward the tractor shed. When they got there, Flip took over the steering to park the ute, and they both climbed out. Flip and Skye took a set of earphones each, hanging over the nails hammered into the side of the shed, and climbed up into the tractor cabin. With a turn of the key and a loud roar, the tractor engine came to life, and soon they were bumping down the driveway high above the ground, on their way through the hill paddock to the bush. When they arrived at the bush, Flip attached heavy chains to a big tree that had fallen over in a bit of clearing. Then, with another roar of the engine, cracking of sticks and small branches, the tractor pulled out of the clearing, dragging the tree behind it. Skye would have loved to climb down from the tractor to explore the patch of ground where the tree had lain. It would have been full of interesting insects and small animals. But it was not the time for that. She stayed firmly seated in the cabin, watching the tree dragging behind the powerful tractor. When the tree was right alongside the pile of wood prepared for the bonfire, Flip turned off the tractor and climbed down to undo the chains. Skye jumped down from the cabin on the other side. Unfortunately, she landed harder than she had anticipated. With a squelch of wet dirt, she fell from her feet onto her knees, hands, and then face, biting her tongue in the process. Tears sprung to her eyes. Flip still had his earphones on and was walking to the tree behind the tractor, so there was no use calling out or beckoning to him. Slowly, Skye picked herself up, wiping her face on her sleeve and her hands on her jeans. She licked a clean bit of shirt to see if there was any blood. She saw a little patch of orangey red spit. Skye walked slowly away from the tractor toward the little bridge over the creek. When Flip glanced up, she caught his eye and waved to him to let him know she was going inside now. Flip blew her a kiss and Skye moved on her bruised legs toward the farmhouse. However, Skye was rather prone to accidents and was used to causing herself small injuries. By the time she reached the path by the farmhouse and then the back door into the kitchen, she was feeling mainly dirty rather than hurt. Chapter 4, Rafterama. When Flip had parked the tractor back in its shed, he went back to the bonfire site for the orange ute. He drove it to the shed and filled the tray of the orange ute with plastic containers, rope and wood that was stored there. He drove it from the shed to the farmhouse and parked it out the front. "Rafterama supplies are in the back of the ute out the front of the house," he told his children as he passed through the kitchen where they were eating on his way to the shower. When the children had eaten, they left Flip and Romy dozing and reading in the living room and went out to get the supplies from the back of the ute. They carried them around the back garden where their curious 6-month-old puppies were keen to investigate and help. As soon as all the plastic containers, rope, wood, and a few other things such as a plastic sheet, hammer, nails, tape, and a small saw were laid out on the back lawn, the children started to consult about how they would make their raft. "Let's hammer the plastic containers onto the wood with nails," suggested Ollie. "If we do that, there will be holes in the containers and water will get in and the raft won't float." "Duh," replied Skye, rolling her eyes. "Kindly tongue," Lisa reminded her sister with a loud sneeze. This was short for, "A kindly tongue is the lodestone of the hearts of men. It is the bread of the spirit. It clotheth the words with meaning. It is the fountain of the light of wisdom and understanding." Baha'u'llah. But after some time, they managed to agree on a plan for building their raft, and they started to put the pieces together. As Lisa sawed the wood, she kept stopping to sneeze. She wiped her nose on the sleeve of her old farm shirt until her nose was running so much she had to go to the outside toilet and get some paper to give it a really big blow. Blowing her nose made her head hurt and her eyes water, and her body was starting to ache. As she came back down the steps to the lawn, she saw Skye cutting the rope to attach the plastic containers to the wooden platform they were making. It was the last task, and when she had finished, the raft would be ready to sail. But Skye was cutting the rope into very short pieces, and Lisa knew they wouldn't be long enough. "Skye, what are you doing?" cried Lisa. "That rope won't be long enough. Now you've wasted the only rope we have." Skye jumped at the suddenness and loudness of Lisa's voice. Lisa was usually the peacemaker, the older sister who helped things go smoothly. It was very unusual for her to shout and to criticize. Tears sprung again into Skye's brown eyes. Ollie was surprised too, and his eyes opened wide. His tummy felt like lots of scared frogs were leaping around inside it. Quietly he said, "Sister, kindly tongue." "How can I use a kindly tongue when you're wrecking our raft? I give up. You two make it on your own," finished Lisa, and she turned to go inside the house. Ollie and Skye looked at each other with wide eyes and open mouths. All the fun of making the raft had completely gone. It felt as if Lisa had punched them in the stomach. They were doing their best. They were all working as a team. How could they make the raft without her? They all knew that everyone makes mistakes. Why was Lisa so upset? Sadly and as quickly as possible, Ollie and Skye finished off the raft. They gathered the tools from the lawn and put them out of reach of the puppies and Rain on the veranda table. Then they went inside. Flip was asleep on the couch. Lisa was sitting in one of the armchairs. Her face was flushed and she looked miserable. Her head was resting against the arm of the chair. Out of the corner of her mouth was a thermometer which Romy had stuck there a few seconds before. Chapter 5, Sick and Grumpy. Within a few minutes, Lisa was out of her dirty farm clothes and tucked up in Flip and Romy's bed. Romy dropped a Panadol into a glass of water. Lisa watched it fizz and bubble in the clear glass until the tablet had completely dissolved. Then she drank the lemony liquid. Romy left a glass of water and a box of tissues by the bed, closed the curtains, kissed her daughter's forehead and left her to sleep. Outside, the rain was starting up again, and the sound of it on the veranda roof woke Flip from his doze. He opened one eye and looked at Ollie and Skye, fresh out of the shower and in clean clothes, playing Uno on the rug in front of the couch. Skye looked up and saw his eye open. "Daddy, are you practicing the hidden word, close one eye and open the other?" she grinned. Flip opened his other eye. "Where's my Lisa Bagiza?" he asked. "She's sick," Rummy answered as she came into the room. Her temperature was about 39. She's sneezing and achy. "Oh no," said Flip. "Do you think that's why she was so grumpy when we made the raft?" asked Ollie. That's a hard question to answer, Ollie," replied Rummy. "And we just discussed that at the study circle with Sangeeta and Roger's friends last week." Sangeeta and Roger had already completed reflections on the life of the spirit and loved it so much they invited their friends to study it too. Now, each week, Rummy tutored a study circle with Sangeeta, Roger, and 3 of their friends. "Let's get the book and answer the questions together for that section," Rummy added. Rummy went to get the book from the shelf. She opened it up to Section 6 of Unit 1. "Now tell me, which of these statements is true and which is false?" "Conflict can be overcome with love and kindness." True. "Words are more effective when they are said with love." True. "It is all right to fight with someone if he starts it." Ollie started to giggle. False. "One has the right to be sharp with others when one is sick or sad." Skye said, False. "What do you think, Ollie?" asked Rummy. "False, I guess, but Lisa must have been feeling so awful." Yep, sometimes when we feel sick or sad, it takes more effort to be courteous, but we really need to try and practice it anyway. Ollie's thoughts suddenly turned to something that seemed much more urgent than courtesy. What if Lisa is sick right up until the derby? The next day, the school bus left Fellowship Farm carrying only 2 Fitzgeralds to Kellyton Primary School. Lisa stayed snuggled down in the bed she had shared with her mother for the night. Flip had slept in the guest room. Lisa was feverish and aching and was barely even aware that her brother and sister had come in to say goodbye to her before they went to wait for the bus. At school, everyone was talking about the rafts they had been working on over the weekend. Ollie and Skye enjoyed hearing about the fun and creative ideas their friends' families had. They hoped that Lisa would be feeling better when they got home and that the 3 of them would get a chance to join the raft race. When they arrived at Fellowship Farm, they crept into their parents' bedroom to see how Lisa was going. Flip was on the phone to the doctor, making an appointment for the next day. Lisa was even more sick. Chapter 6: The Meeting on Mount Carmel. For the next couple of days, Lisa drank and slept a lot. Olingah and Skye prayed healing prayers morning and night for their sister. Skye sometimes wondered if the prayers would have much power. She was genuinely praying for her sister to be well. But she was also hoping that her prayers would mean they would all get to go in the raft race together. Finally, on Thursday night, Lisa came and joined the family at the dinner table. She just ate a little soup and toast, but she was starting to feel better. "How are you feeling, sister?" asked Ollie. "Bit better," said Lisa quietly after she swallowed her mouthful of soup. "Will you go to school tomorrow?" Ollie asked. Lisa looked at her mum with questioning eyes. "No, Lisa won't be going to school this week," said Rummy. Ollie's shoulders slumped. "So, will she be able to go in the raft race?" "We'll see," said Rummy. It was the worst of all answers. Skye then started to wonder about something. She didn't say anything straight away, because she wanted to practice the virtue of tactfulness. But later, when Lisa had gone back to bed and Skye was washing the dishes with Flip, she remembered her thought and said, "Daddy, if Lisa can't go in the raft race and has to watch from the riverbank, do you think Olingah and I should miss it too?" Flip didn't answer Skye's question directly. He said, "Let me tell you a story." Skye loved Flip's stories, and she knew somehow the story would help her answer her question. From the living room, Ollie had heard the magic words, "Let me tell you a story," and he came into the kitchen too and sat himself on a kitchen chair to listen. Flip began to tell his story. "Many years ago, in 1898, he began. "Was that before you were born, Dad?" asked Ollie. "Just a little," replied Flip. "Shh, Ollie," said Skye-Maree. "Many years ago, in 1898, in the time of your great-great-grandparents, the very first Baha'is from the West arrived in the Holy Land to visit Abdu'l-Baha." "The West?" interrupted Olingah again. "Like the Wicked Witch of the West who was after Dorothy and Toto?" Olingah interrupted again. "No, my dear," said Flip patiently. "Like from America and Europe instead of from Persia." Skye finished drying up and pushed herself onto the table next to her brother's chair. "So, a long time ago, the very first Baha'is from America and Europe came to visit Abdu'l-Baha in prison in the Holy Land. One of them was May Bowles Maxwell." Olingah and Skye's faces lit up. They had heard many stories about May Bowles Maxwell before. May and her companions arrived in the Holy Land after a long and difficult journey. They took a small boat in a rough and stormy sea to get to Haifa. And then they went by horse and carriage along the seashore to get to Akka. Finally, after many months of wishing and hoping for that moment, they got to meet Abdu'l-Baha. Their hearts were full of joy. Abdu'l-Baha told the pilgrims that on Sunday he would meet them on Mount Carmel, under the shade of the trees where Baha'u'llah had rested when he was still alive. Everyone was really looking forward to it, especially May. But then, on Sunday morning, May woke up feeling very, very sick. She thought she would miss out on the visit to Mount Carmel with the Master. She felt very sad. The other pilgrims felt sorry for her, but they got ready to go. Then, Abdu'l-Baha arrived at the bedside of May Maxwell. He felt her pulse and said, "There will be no meeting on Mount Carmel today. We could not go and leave one of the beloved of God alone and sick. We could none of us be happy unless all the beloved were happy." Everyone was very surprised. Just because one person was sick, the whole gathering was cancelled. They realized that no matter how important the meeting was, it was much more important to show love and kindness to all the friends. And so, the meeting on Mount Carmel with Abdu'l-Baha waited for another day. Skye knew she had the answer to her question. She just had to wait and see how Lisa would be feeling on Saturday. Chapter 7, Raising the Banner. When Ollie and Skye arrived home on the school bus, they were very happy to see Lisa at the gate. She was rugged up in a big woolly jumper and coat, with a warm hat pulled over her ears, and in her hands were branches of richly coloured autumn leaves. After climbing out of the bus, they gave her a big hug. "Sister!" exclaimed Ollie. "Are you better?" "Well, today was a boring day," replied Lisa. Ollie and Skye knew what she meant. Whenever they fell sick, there were days of being sick. And then, when they were well again, there were days of being well, and in between was the boring day when they were too weak to go to school or go out to play, but too well to just lie around in bed all day. "Yay!" said Skye. "That means tomorrow you'll be well again." Ollie and Skye changed quickly out of their school uniforms and into their farm clothes. They ate the snack that Flip had prepared for them. Just as they finished their juice, there was a honk out the front of the farmhouse. The three children hurried out the back door and pulled on their boots from the boot room. They ran around to the front of the house and clambered into the cabin of the ute. Flip would need to drive on the public road for 1 kilometre or 2, so they couldn't go in the back. For the first time in days, it didn't hurt Lisa's head to walk and run. Flip drove slowly out of the farm and turned left toward the coast. Every now and then, he stopped the ute and one of the children hopped out and stuck an orange flag into the gravel on the side of the road. Soon, Flip turned right into the paddock that led to the river. The children continued to leave the orange flags along the side of the road until they reached the open grassy patch by the riverbank, where people would park their cars when they arrived for the race. He pulled up under the big old gum tree. A flock of parakeets flew swiftly into the air. The children climbed out and undid the back of the ute tray. They pulled out a big canvas banner with 4 ropes attached, 1 to each corner. It was the same banner they had used before. Uncle Jack had helped them make it for the first year. The banner said, "Welcome to the Naw Ruz Mahta River Rafting Race." Ollie clambered up one of the gum trees on the riverbank, slipping and sliding on the smooth white bark between branches. Skye climbed one a few meters away and Flip passed them the ropes to loop over the branches. Soon the banner was hanging between the trees. It was a little crooked, and when strong gusts of wind blew, it was hard to read the letters on the flapping canvas. But it was up, ready for the big race the next day. Lisa checked the level of the river and saw that it was flowing solidly. It would be a good derby tomorrow. She helped clear some branches away from the area where the people would park their cars. After picking up a few branches, though, her head started to hurt, and she climbed into the back of the ute to rest. Ollie and Skye climbed out of the trees and went over to where their sister sat. "Are you okay?" said Skye. "Yup," said Lisa softly. Skye and Ollie looked at each other. The race was only 24 hours away. They thought of the raft they had made. They thought of the fun they had had the years before, racing down the river with their friends, more in the water than on it, most of the time. And then they thought of Abdul-Baha and May Maxwell. After preparing the riverside, the children and Flip returned to the farmhouse to prepare for the 19-day feast. But only Ollie and Skye put their feast clothes on. Lisa put her pajamas on and climbed into bed. "I'll stay with Lisa," said Romy to Flip. "Okay, my love," said Flip, giving her a kiss on the cheek. "I'll take these angels off to be spiritually restored and endued with a power that is not of this world." Ollie looked at Flip in confusion. "What are you talking about, Daddy?" "It means I am taking you to the feast, Possum," said Flip. "Oh," said Ollie, not really sure what his dad was talking about. Then he turned to his mum. "Do you think Lisa will be well by tomorrow morning, Mummy?" "I don't really know, Ollie. Maybe she just needs one more big sleep. Or maybe that won't be enough." Chapter 8. The Derby and Possum Poo. Naw Ruz dawned bright, sunny and warm. The whole family slept later than usual, tired from the early mornings of the fast and the late night of the feast. When Ollie opened his eyes in the sunlit bedroom, and uncurled himself like a wombat from his burrow of doona. He saw that Skye-Maree was awake and looking at him. Both of them were thinking the same thing. Both of them wondered if their family was going to be able to participate in the derby. 2 brown legs swinging over the side of the top bunk was the first good sign. A big smile on Lisa's face was the second good sign. But the best of all was when she leapt onto her brother's bed and tackled him with all her usual energy, rolling him up in his doona and roaring like a lion. In seconds, Skye was on her back, rescuing her brother from the fierce beast, and then being tickled herself. "Yay!" came an excited but muffled voice from under the doona. "She's better!" Prayers, breakfasts and chores were rushed affairs. Just as the children hurried back to the house after feeding the pigs, dogs, hens and pigeons, the first cars appeared in the distance, coming up the long, straight stretch of dirt road from Kellyton toward Fellowship Farm. "They're coming!" screeched Ollie, and they all broke into a run up the veranda steps. Soon the Fitzgerald family had piled into the ute, with the children's raft and a rubber dinghy tied securely on the tray at the back, and were following their own trail of orange flags toward the river. As they untied their rafts, other cars began to arrive. Soon the field by the river was full of cars, colourful rafts, people in swimmers, as well as floaties and life jackets, hats, gumboots and zinc cream. It was perfect weather, hot and still. The children were keen to get in the river, and soon it was full of rafts of different shapes, sizes and stability, covered in wet, laughing and splashing families, struggling to get on, stay on and float. At 10 o'clock, Romy officially welcomed the Kellyton community to the annual Naw Ruz Derby. Then she cried, "On your marks, get set, go!" before splashing into the water herself and joining Flip in their rubber dinghy. Lisa, Skye and Ollie, like most of the other contestants, tumbled on and off their sagging and disintegrating raft, and with great hilarity they all headed off downstream. Very few rafts made it all the way to the bridge in one piece, and by the end of the race, the main task was to catch the bits of wood, foam, plastic containers, balloon and other things that were floating freely down the river toward the bridge. It was, as always, rather unclear who won the derby, and so Romy and Flip declared them all winners. The rafts and lilos, rubber dinghies and various bits and pieces were pulled from the river. A few adults who had not gone in the race met everyone at the bridge to cart ute loads of wet and laughing Kellytonians back to the start to collect their vehicles. Soon after this, the stream of cars and utes flowed from the riverbank to the field behind the farmhouse. As the community gathered around and the barbecue was started, Romy lit the bonfire, and soon it was a roaring, hissing, crackling tower of flame and smoke, drying the damp wood and exciting the children. The air filled with the smell of barbecuing veggie burgers, sausages and onions. After the children had several rounds of tip around the bonfire, Flip announced that the food was ready. To Lisa's embarrassment, he did this with a long, loud blast on his imaginary trumpet. A long line of hungry children appeared at the barbecue, who were soon happily burning their tongues on hot burgers and sausages wrapped in bread and tomato sauce. And then the hunt for good marshmallow sticks began. Big bags of marshmallows were handed around, and soon there were blobs of melting pink sugar dripping into the flames at the edge of the bonfire and into eager little mouths. When everyone had full and bursting tummies, Flip announced the start of the scavenger hunt. He handed out the lists of things to find, and the children scattered over the field, searching for live worms, possum poo, a yellow flower, a stick that looked like an animal, and many other treasures. "Possum poo!" exclaimed Lisa as she read the list to some younger children who couldn't read the long words. "That's disgusting!" But her group went off nonetheless to see what treasure they would find. It was Skye's group who came up with the creative idea of carrying the possum poo on a leaf. Chapter 9, A Naw Ruz Resolution. Piles of treasure were brought to Flip to inspect. Leftover sausages, now cold, were eaten, and the bonfire settled to a low, smouldering pile of ash. Tired children sat with their parents in the grass by the fire, heads resting on the legs of mummies and daddies. Gradually, one by one, families gathered their belongings, thanked the Fitzgeralds for another wonderful Naw Ruz, and headed to their cars. Ollie, Lisa, and Skye-Maree were tired and grubby. Particularly, Skye seemed covered from head to toe with sticky marshmallow, sausage grease, and charcoal streaks. Her knees were muddy and her hair was a wild tangle filled with bits of sticks and leaves from the river. With the last of their energy, they helped Romy and Flip pack up the barbecue and take the plastic cups and plates inside for washing. Flip made sure the bonfire was completely out and then joined them inside. "Thank you for a wonderful Naw Ruz," said Lisa, wrapping her arms around Romy. "Yes, thank you," added Skye and Ollie, hugging their dad. No, thank you," said Flip, "for your helpfulness, joyfulness, gratitude, and welcomefulness." "Welcomefulness?" asked Skye. "Yes, you made all our guests feel very welcome. Welcomefulness is the virtue of making people feel welcome, don't you know?" Ollie wasn't sure if that was really true. Sometimes his dad seemed to know of words which no one else in the world had ever heard. "Did anyone ask about the meaning of Naw Ruz this year?" asked Lisa. "Yes," said Romy happily. "I had a long talk with Julie from the library, and she is keen to come to our next devotional meeting." "One of my friends asked too," said Lisa. "I think we could invite her to the children's class." "Maybe it's time we got a junior youth group together for you and your friends, Lisa." "Yes," said Lisa. She had really outgrown the children's class and was starting to find it rather boring. "The only problem," added Romy, "is that if we start it now, it will be interrupted next year when you go to boarding school for high school." Lisa's tummy did a quick flip. She didn't like to think about the next school year, when she would have to go all the way to Launceston and stay there during the term. She decided not to think about it. After all, it was a whole year away. "Well, maybe we can start it this year and just see what happens next year." "Good idea," said Romy. "Let's make that our New Year's resolution, to establish a junior youth group at Fellowship Farm." "An excellent idea," exclaimed Flip. "Happy Naw Ruz!" "Happy Naw Ruz!" replied the Fitzgeralds of Fellowship Farm.